Throughout the history of modern popular culture, there are mythologies and franchises that began successfully but weren't legendary until an extra ingredient was added into the mix sometime later. Take the Avengers. The original lineup was solid, successful comic writing, but it wasn't until Captain America was added to the roster with Avengers issue number 4 that you could see the potential of the team fully realized. Now say the words "The Avengers" and Captain America is the first hero many people recall.
I understood that reference.
Magnum P.I. was a popular show from its launch, but for the first 10 episodes it used a slower, jazzy opening theme. When they changed the opening sequence and replaced the theme entirely, Magnum P.I. became the unforgettable 1980s action show we all remember. Are the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers merely popular without the Green Ranger, while legendary with him? Most fans, I expect, would say yes. Then there's G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, where the argument for when the story became legend is more debated. Some argue the original 13 characters were everything right from the off. Some maintain it wasn't until Duke and Destro came onto the scene that its status was established. But for others, it was 1985 that made A Real American Hero an icon, when the roster was completed by characters like Alpine, Bazooka, Dusty, Quick Kick, Flint and Lady J, Snake Eyes getting his wolf, a firmly established Storm Shadow introduced the year before, Zartan and the Dreadnoks, and of course this loser.
Let's you and I get together
Let's not! And pretend we did, okay?
But everything I've just cited comes from the 20th century, where the world of marketing and merchandise was a very different place. It's much harder now to establish new ideas, to the point that I often wonder, is it even possible for something to become iconic anymore? However, the new Action Force series may have done just that, while we weren't even paying attention. Valaverse's Action Force had an uphill battle in every direction. The major franchises are owned by megacorporations that keep repeating the same trumpet blasts in the ears of consumers, so they have a tough time hearing the arrival of new ideas. Toy sales are shifting from children to adults, while shelf space for toys in retail stores continues to shrink, further reducing people's awareness of new products and stories. Adding to this was an outspoken tenor against military-based toys for quite some time. Valaverse also had to contend with adults who remembered the original Action Force brand that might reject a new mythology under the legacy marquee. And of course, there was always the presence of the G.I. Joe hardliners who don't see room for any other military-themed toys, and claim anything other than G.I. Joe is a ripoff of A Real American Hero. Valaverse, having no clout at the time to sell a film or TV series, was going to attempt to establish the mythology of Action Force through comics, a medium that has been on the downswing for years in mainstream spaces. Then you have the simple fact that Valaverse was an unknown quantity in a consumer base that is very loyal to known brands and very suspicious of new vendors. By any objective assessment, Valaverse was outmanned and outgunned from the start. Yet those conditions may be precisely what generated the assuredness and doggedness under fire that Valaverse has become known for in the toy collecting community. Instead of a gradual courting of a customer base and steadily carving out a toehold in the marketplace like other independent toy makers have done, Valaverse flat out dropped into the middle of the toy collecting arena fully loaded and ready to fight like paratroopers on D-Day.
Looks like you guys are gonna be surrounded.
We're paratroopers, Lieutenant. We're supposed to be surrounded.
Their initial offering was a strong showing of figures, easily outpacing the lax design habits of the major players in the action figure space. The value for your dollar was immediately apparent. This wasn't drawing blood from a stone to convince yourself the money was worth what showed up in the box. Fully detailed accessories, quality paintwork on the figures, and all real-world based. The first wave wasn't without unintended issues that affected some of the figures, namely some reports of broken hip joints, all due to a mistake at the factory. These issues were openly dealt with directly from Valaverse in a public way. Hardly the standard operating procedure of corporate forces like Hasbro and Mattel, who turn deaf ears to quality control problems even now. Needless to say, Valaverse handled instances of defective figures with replacements for every affected customer going into Series 2. And what a series the second turned out to be, as the Action Force comics continued to tell the story of a near-future America fractured by division and geopolitical chaos, a modern mythology for our modern times. Action Force's Series 2 figures reflected that world without flags they would have to fight under. American fighting men allied with British SAS, while the ground forces of the Swarm and the equally destructive Garrison troops made their debut in the figure range. This time, the figures were as Valaverse had intended with Series 1, barring a final small batch of Scarab troops that experienced a hip joint failure. But these were sorted out by Valaverse in typical transparent fashion. I should say typical fashion for Valaverse. Transparency is not typical with the competition. Regardless, the Action Force troops were rolling out double time in 2022, and the sailing was, by and large, smooth. When the full group stood together, no one could argue how impressive a feat it was seeing all of these military figures with their excellent gear sets, their modern military styling, and the knowledge that all of these characters had been pulled together in a relatively short period of time by a fledgling toy company. However, as impressive as the quality of the figures were, they hadn't achieved escape velocity yet in pop culture terms. At the end of the year, we received the Special Deployment Series, an opportunity for collectors to get Swarm and Steel Brigade troopers again, as well as the new figures of Blowback, the Swarm Sentry, and the Infantry Commando, along with new dedicated gear sets for Steel Brigade and the generic troopers, including the long-awaited Special Ops gearbox. And I just told him, I said, no, I'm serious. These eggs will gag a buzzard. Yeah, dude, the breakfast is just awful. Guys, look! Look! Notice anything different? You look more obnoxious than ever, Gordon. Good one, Derek. Oh, you're always coming up with those zingers. No, guys, look. My gear showed up. I'm wearing the gear. I got my weapons. I can finally go on missions with you. Oh my God, like you can sit there and tell me, take the point, Gordon, and I'll be like, yes, sir. And then sometimes I can be like, oh my God, you take the point. And then other times you might be like, dude, you gotta watch our 6. And I'll be like, yeah, I'm gonna watch your 6. And I got my weapons. And then you're gonna be like, no, you know what? I'm gonna watch your 6. We can watch each other's 6s. We can go on point for each other. We can spearhead attacks. I don't have to be left behind anymore on missions. Oh, this is gonna be so great. We're probably gonna build campfires together. We're gonna take names. It's gonna be so amazing. I just can't wait. I gotta call my mom. I gotta call my girlfriend in Canada. This is new. This is amazing. On top of all of that was the Crimson Shadow Arsenal weapons tin, which is the stuff of all figure collectors' dreams. A pile of 98 alternate and replacement weapons and 30 flash effects for your Action Force and other 6-inch scale figures. Weapons that are widely being used right now to correct many of the G.I. Joe classified figures from Hasbro that continue to come with lame, Nerf-like accessories. However, the unspoken finish line for the true completion of the first stage of Action Force's roster would not arrive until the new year with Series 3, which Valaverse nicknamed the AllFemale Wave, as that would be the series in which the female sculpts would finally be options for collectors. Art and storytelling is a very subjective and dynamic process. I freely admit what I've just asserted could have been motivated by having read the backstory of Action Force's character of Eclipse in the comics over a year before her arrival in the toy line. So that could have prompted me to feel like the line wasn't fully staged yet. However, I'm also confident in the belief that sometimes it takes the arrival of a few remaining characters to put the final polish on a concept. The Ghostbusters didn't really feel like a complete team until Winston Zeddemore joined up. His down-to-earth, dry personality completed the character dynamics that made the film so unforgettable.
If there's a steady paycheck in it, I'll believe anything you say.
That's a big Twinkie.
When someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes!
When you're forming a team, you kind of know when something's missing. How many times have we mentioned the number of characters that were key to a story, but were inexplicably left out of the toy line? When I look at my Superpowers collection, I'm really glad I went the extra mile to grab Firestorm and Cyborg, as they were major characters in the cartoon's Superpowers-based seasons. The cast looks incomplete without them. Adding a Jenny to my Bucky O'Hare collection, despite it being a modern remake, finally made the group feel complete. Every Justice League has its Wonder Woman. Every Avengers has its Wasp. Every Rogues Gallery has its Catwoman. Every mythology needs its April O'Neil and Casey Jones. So as I was unboxing the Series 3 Action Force characters, I suddenly got the sense that I needed to see the entire roster of heroes together for the first time, because I started to feel like the first major stage of Action Force might be complete. Series 3 includes the villainess Pandora in both standard and limited bloody deco, with dual pistols in addition to the rest of her arsenal. Just adding her to the villains group alone brings that final element the bad guys of Action Force were missing. She's a dash of color and a heavy helping of dangerous that makes the antagonists in this universe go from formidable to unpredictable. We also get the first basic female troopers in this series, the Special Ops and Delta troopers, as well as the first female Steel Brigade trooper, while the female-compatible gear sets are arriving later. The additions of these seemingly simple figures make Valaverse's progress on this line immediately apparent and even more impressive. What I mean by that is, Valaverse has managed to create 3 fully garrisoned subgroups of figures within Action Force apart from the main heroes and villains. And they've achieved this in only 3 series of figures. Now, you might say, well, that's due to copious reuse of parts. I would remind you this is a military-themed toy line, where uniforms and gear are often standardized between soldiers. Plus, reuse of parts wasn't a concern for Masters of the Universe. The franchise survived very successfully by unapologetically reusing as much as possible. And in the closest analog to Valaverse's Action Force, the first 13 Real American Hero figures were achieved through massive amounts of reuse. But even within the first 3 waves of figures in the Real American Hero line, they did not achieve the fully built-out subgroups that Action Force boasts. G.I. Joe was hinting at the Dreadnoks in 1984's third wave, with only Zartan released. With the Swarm having been fully established by the end of the Special Deployment series, the figures and gear sets of Action Force Series 3 reveal 2 more robust subgroups. The first is the Steel Brigade, Action Force's main troop builder category for good guys. Within 3 series, Valaverse has built this group out so effectively, a collector could exclusively buy Steel Brigade variants and feel like they were buying a standalone figure line. The basic Steel Brigade figure, offered in both Series 1 and the Special Deployment series, has options for a gold-accented helmet, which I envision denotes the squad leader, as well as the basic Brigade Trooper helmet. Then we have the Night Ops Steel Brigade, and what more do I need to say on this one? It's pretty self-explanatory and admittedly really cool. A gear set offered up in the Special Deployment series allows you to create a Heavy Assault Brigade Trooper, complete with unique helmet to vary up the team even further. Finally, with Series 3, we are provided a female Steel Brigade soldier, who also comes with the optional gold-accented helmet. Just looking at them in a complete group, you have to remind yourself this isn't even Action Force's main event, but a mere subgroup, and not even the only subgroup. Aside from the Swarm and the Steel Brigade, we have what I dub the Tactical Commandos. These generic soldiers have been peppered throughout each wave of Action Force figures, and when combined with their various gear sets, become an imposing and exciting figure series in their own right. Plus, their various color combos and roles within Action Force allow them to break off as support personnel for any groups you can dream up. I always envision the Delta Trooper with Duster and Sergeant Slaughter, while the Infantry Commando is on desert missions with Desert Rat and Trigger. Back at HQ, the Riot and Urban Troopers back up Condor, Rollout, and Blowback, while the Special Ops Troopers are exclusively clandestine mission specialists, who are sometimes led by the Night Ops Steel Brigade soldier. However, in my mind, their regular battlefield commander is the new Series 3 character, Killswitch. Not only does Killswitch once again illustrate Valaverse's superior ability to sculpt engaging characters, but the combination of tactical small arms combined with her sniper rifle really gives you the sense this person is capable of handling any situation, while also commanding authority through her experience and skill. Given the hype that surrounded the release of Pandora, and the arresting visual impact of Killswitch when she showed up at collectors' doorsteps, Valaverse's announcement at the same time that Eclipse was finally getting an action figure was, well, kind of eclipsed. This is a character that has been in the mythology since the cover of issue 3 of the Action Force comic, with one of the most interesting backstories of the cast, and that's saying something. Now she's finally here in 3 dimensions and able to stand alongside the rest of the Action Force roster. and when I placed her and Killswitch into the full group of Action Force heroes for the first time, it really felt like the team was truly complete. I understood why Pandora got a lot of the hype from Action Force fans, because in a lot of franchises, the bad girl characters steal the spotlight. And I also understood why Killswitch might have stolen some of Eclipse's thunder initially, as she's in a more striking and personalized outfit, while Eclipse is representing the more standard Action Force combat uniform worn by Condor and Rollout. However, when you take a step back and look at Eclipse as a total package, there's a very understated excellence to this figure. Eclipse is an action figure that very slowly captures your eye, a character that doesn't demand your attention, but before you know it, she's commanding your attention. There is so much detail baked into this figure, but again, not details that shout at the rafters like Pandora's tattoos and punk hair. Rather, the fine paintwork on the headscarf embroidery, the calm determination in her face, and the added detail of the single hair clip to keep her braid out of her eyes. Then there's the alternate head with the full scarf, and you end up truly torn which one to display, because the full scarf has such impact. I was immediately reminded of scenes from The Living Daylights, my favorite James Bond film. Bobby Vala has often joked he isn't going to include Ninja in Action Force. I think it's safe to say with Eclipse, he no longer needs to worry about that, as he's created a look with this figure that is a 21st century military character with all the mystique of a ninja, but with all the relevance of a post-9/11 world. With most figures I own that come with alternate heads, even the other Action Force characters, it's never a question which head I prefer to display. With Eclipse, I truly couldn't decide, so I admit I ordered another Eclipse so I could have both versions on display at the same time. With all of the Action Force heroes, the faces exude strength and determination. That's obvious. These are soldiers. But there's something different about Eclipse that we have yet to learn. Killswitch was a stellar soldier, but a reluctant recruit, who only signed on with Action Force in exchange for more information about her CIA operative father, who died under mysterious circumstances when she was young. She has a deal with Action Force, and she's holding up her end of it. Eclipse is a willing warrior. The progeny of a survival expert and an army veteran, she is ready to serve and ready to fight, and her background as a paratrooper and a ranger makes her unfazed by almost any tactical situation. She's used to being surrounded in combat. The art of blending in is second nature, given her extensive experience in covert solo missions behind enemy lines, and she doesn't rely on any fancy equipment. We already know she's willing to pursue her own personal agenda in parallel with her assigned mission, and she isn't concerned about the regulations getting in the way of her vendetta. In short, Eclipse is a deadly opponent that should never be underestimated. She doesn't have the shock and awe style of Pandora, nor the standout flash of Killswitch, but she's not supposed to. The deadliest member of Action Force may very well be the one who looks the least lethal. I get the sense that Eclipse's prowess for covert missions hinges on making people overlook her, and her action figure is symbolic of that character trait within the figure line itself. Now, you may think I'm crazy for pontificating on Eclipse for this long, that I'm reading into it or applying headcanon or fan gushing. Truth is, I don't know what's going to happen with this character in the mythology. I could be totally wrong. I'm analyzing what I know and speculating on what I don't. And for a moment I thought, maybe I was crazy. Until this happened.
Love all you guys, and I'm in love with Eclipse. We know
Eclipse,
so much.
Eclipse is the sleeper of the line. I'm telling you guys. It doesn't mean that Pandora doesn't look good. You know, I didn't think that a girl could be sexy with that scar on her face, but I'm telling you, Eclipse, she's the real sleeper of the line.
You don't get better validation than Articulated Ninja's seal of approval. Regardless of which character you like best, or even which faction, the inclusion of these three characters caps off the first full phase of Action Force as a mythology. And this group of heroes right here is Genesis. This is Action Force's quote-unquote original 13. You can feel it when you see them together. And like I've said before, it's crazy to consider this is only Valaverse's first phase, and it's already at this level of quality and bleeding-edge ambition in terms of action figure development. These figures prompted Hasbro to step up their G.I. Joe classified game, and presently Hasbro is still miles behind Valaverse in articulation, sculpting, and overall design. With Series 3 of Action Force, we've just witnessed the coalescing of a new franchise. A franchise that would be foolish to underestimate.